All right, so today we have our webinar, Bringing Entrepreneurial Skills into Grantmaking Practices. So for those of you who don't know EPIP, we are Emerging Practitioners in Philanthropy, a national network of foundation professionals and social entrepreneurs who strive for excellence in the practice of philanthropy. Our mission is to develop emerging leaders committed to building a just, equitable, and sustainable society. We have just a couple of announcements to make about some recent projects and events coming up. In case you haven't heard, we just launched our Doing Good in the 21st Century project joint venture with La Piana Consulting, and you can check that out on our website at epip.org/doinggood. And we're also tweeting about this project with the hashtag #DoGood. So definitely take a look at some of those videos. A lot of EPIP members are featured in them, and we'd love to hear your feedback on that as well. We are continuing with our Measuring a Leader programming, and this webinar and others in the future will contain information that our members and our partners want to share with all of you. So if you have a knowledge area or a skill that you'd like to share with members, get in touch with Michael at epip.org, and we can feature one of your webinars as well. And coming up on November 5th in Boston, we're having our annual People of Color gathering. So look for information on that on the EPIP website. A couple of housekeeping rules. You're all on mute for the time being. If you're calling in on the phone, please mute your computer. There will be time for questions and conversation. And if you have questions or if you have any issues with your technology and you need to talk to us, use the chat box. And we will get to your questions as soon as we can. We are also recording this webinar. So if anyone is having trouble or has a question, please use that chat box. So today's speakers, we have our own Executive Director, Rahsaan Harris, and joining us specially today is Todd Schechter from Ignite Good and Social Good Startup. And so we are going to turn it over to Todd in a moment, as soon as I get his slideshow up. All right. One second. Okay.
So as we're getting it ready, I just wanted to say that thank you first for showing up to this webinar. And I'm a big fan of Todd's because I met him first and foremost through his work with Ignite Good, which is really trying to inspire millennials to bring their best ideas to changing the world. And they had a competition that was advertised and announced through the Huffington Post, and that's when I first got to meet them, and I got a chance to actually review a lot of the ideas that were submitted to be funded. It was fantastic. And then also I found out that he's also a great teacher of social entrepreneurs, and I wanted to bring that kind of knowledge into our space. And many of you might ask, what does being an entrepreneur have to do with grant making? And I would argue it has everything to do, because I think we need to find ways that we can take competitive advantage and using kind of our best thinking and our innovation and creativity to solve the tough intrinsic problems that we face today in the world. So whether it's you trying to bring your own idea to life outside of your day job, or whether it's you trying to bring entrepreneurial skills to your grant making, I think this is extremely helpful, and we're really grateful to have Todd with us.
Great, thanks, Rahsaan. It's a pleasure to be here. So thanks for having me. I couldn't agree with you more of how important and how relevant entrepreneurial skills to those working in the philanthropic sector. And as we'll get to later on in this very brief introduction, I view those organizations as entrepreneurial ventures themselves. And Emily, thanks for arranging the details for the webinar and helping everything run smoothly. So we can launch the first poll.
Sure.
And then just jump into things. So
we're gonna launch a poll. I know some of you are complaining about the audio and an echo. Our apologies, but our space is a little echoey, so we will try our best to be as clear as possible. But if you do misunderstand something that's said, please type in your question and we'll try to repeat ourselves. So thanks for your patience. So please take a moment with this first poll, which is, what is your level of familiarity with social entrepreneurship? And so we're going to close it in just a couple of seconds. Most of you are voting, so we appreciate that. And we're going to go ahead and close the poll. So it looks like most of you are somewhat familiar, which is great, which is our goal. But we're hoping to increase your understanding today.
yeah, and thanks for participating in the poll. There are going to be a few times throughout the webinar we're just going to check in with you to get a read on who we're speaking to and how things are moving along, and having that information helps me shape how I describe what we're talking about, and helps Rahsaan and Emily have a good sense of what level of competency those who are participating have. So if the screen share is working for you all, you're probably staring at Bill Gates and maybe wondering a little bit why I picked this particular person to kick things off today. And you can read the quote, "Giving money effectively is almost as hard as earning it in the first place." I thought this was particularly relevant to our conversation today because depending on how you decide to define success, whether in our culture, whether it's making a lot of money or committing a lot of your time and energy and resources to making a difference, in both of those categories, no one can argue that Bill Gates isn't among the top of the list. Now, how he got there and other things aside, the intersection of the challenges that he's faced and the solutions that he's attempted to design in the entrepreneurial space and in the social impact space are at a global scale, and I think reflect well on that intersection of the relevance of entrepreneurship and the challenges of entrepreneurship as they relate to philanthropy. So we just start with a question, which is, what is social entrepreneurship? And the reality is there are a lot of definitions out there. But for the purpose of this webinar today, we're going to keep it simple because we want to make sure everyone's leaving with a clear understanding of what exactly we're talking about. And so I think the bottom line for you all is that social entrepreneurship is designing a business model that supports social change. And we're going to get into the details of what business models are in a second. But at the end of the day, that's where social entrepreneurship has the potential to bridge all different types of organizations, from businesses to nonprofits and foundations. It's important to point out that this is not new. While the language around social entrepreneurship is relatively trendy, people have been innovating ways to deliver social value for as long as civilization's been around. And while it's great that people are starting to pay attention to new models, and while the infrastructure of the industry around hybrid approaches to solving problems or self-sustaining approaches to solving problems has continued to gain steam, there are great representations and examples and case examples of innovation to achieve social change throughout human history. And so as we jump into the conversation of what's happening in our contemporary world, I think it's just important to recognize that while this is new language, the practice of social entrepreneurship has actually been around for quite a long time. When people think about what it means to be an entrepreneur, if you haven't done it already, or if you haven't had that practice, our culture tends to put people up on this pedestal. And I'm here to tell you that you don't have to be a genius or an inventor to be an entrepreneur, but you do have to be a designer. And what that really means is that you have to think creatively sometimes coming up with new combinations or new ways of talking about things that are already out there. And it's those innovations, not necessarily inventions, although sometimes those are involved, but it's the innovation of thinking about common things that are already there and new combinations of those things that often lead to the most impactful, most scalable solutions. And recombining existing things is something that pretty much anyone can do. So it should feel empowering to think about it that way. Design, for those of you who are not familiar with this book, it's sort of a quick way to get a sense of the role that design and the language around design is playing in what has traditionally been more of a planning environment. This book is called The Business Model Generation. It was written by a number of professors, mostly at Stanford University, that basically said, we need to change the way that we think about business model design. It's not about planning anymore. It's about quick, rapid iteration. And to get away from planning, we need to design a visual tool. So what you're looking at now is called the business model canvas. This is the template that this book recommends those who are designing with business models tend to use. And what it does is it breaks down the key components of what they consider to be a business model into 9 separate categories. You can read here. The details are less important for the purpose of this workshop than beginning to get an introduction to what are the basic components of a business model generally. And here you can get a sense. It includes who your customers are, which can also be beneficiaries, what's your value proposition, what are you providing them, how do you make money, what are your costs, who are you working with, key activities, what are you doing. At the end of the day, it's these elements and the combination of these elements that create individual business models. So the question that the authors of this book posed was, well, could you possibly explain a full business model in just a few words or a few pictures? And for those unfamiliar with this approach, it may seem a little bit confusing. How would you do that? So we're just going to share a quick example. This is sort of the way that business model generation folks recommend that you use their canvas. Very quick, short descriptions of each element of a canvas, oftentimes on Post-its, so it's easy to take it on and off. And for teams working together, it's easy to collaborate and move things around. As you can get a sense of looking through this, what kind of businesses, I won't tell you because it should be self-evident. And if not, then maybe they can do a better job of further clarifying it. Also, I should say as we're going along, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat window and we'll address them as they come up.
Actually, just to jump in here, I know that we here at EPIP have used software to look at the EPIP model that basically copies this same approach. So there is software out there for the iPad to do this sort of business model thinking. If any of you are interested in the software, we're happy to talk to you afterwards about how to get it.
Great, thanks, Emily. So what is a business model? Well, business model generation describes it as the rationale of how an organization creates, delivers, and captures value. Now, coming from many of you from the philanthropic space, from the social impact space, in my work with Social Good Startup, my colleague Shauna Dressler and I, we've evolved this definition to be what we think is more relevant to the social impact space. So what is a social good business model as we describe it? And as you can see on your screen, we describe it as the rationale of how an organization, yes, creates, delivers, and captures economic value, but also how it creates and delivers social benefit. And it's considering both of these elements that's really the key intersection where I think most of social entrepreneurship lives and where most of the potential for social entrepreneurship moving forward is rooted in. So as we move through the day, if you think about the foundations where you're working now or potentially organizations you want to lead later, how is it that you as an organization create and deliver social benefit? And that's the key to your social business model. Your foundation has a business model too. And although you're not making money, in the previous slide, there are the green words in this might seem more relevant for you. That doesn't mean that you don't have a business model. It just means that raising money may not necessarily be part of what you're doing. Some foundations do, some foundations don't. But managing your resources, executing programs, deciding what to fund, what I hope that we can begin to explore and imagine through the course of the rest of this webinar is that that too is an example of this business model. And so as we go through the rest of the webinar, I encourage you to think about the question is either for the work that you're doing now or the work that you imagine doing, what is the unique model for creating and delivering social value that you and your organization represent in the world? What are the elements of that? What's the combination of those elements? And if you don't have clarity around that, what can you do to get clarity around your foundation and what the business model for that is? And if you're thinking about in the future launching your own organization, what's the business model for that going to look like? And so with that question in mind, we're going to jump into another poll question, and I'll let Emily take it away.
Okay, so our next poll, we're curious to know, have you ever thought about launching your own startup? There are 3 options. I have started my own business. I have thought about starting my own business, and I've never given it any thought. So please let us know what your thinking is here, and we'll close the poll in just a couple seconds. Okay, this is fantastic. More than half of you have thought about starting your own business, which is really great. I think that's sort of the future of our working model anyway, considering the environment right now. But
yeah,
what do you think about that, Todd?
Well, it's really nice to see. So just to share the details of these numbers with the crowd, 11% of you have already started your own businesses or organizations. 61% of you have thought about it but haven't yet done it. And 28% of you are not really interested in doing that. And that's okay. If you're in that 28%, stay on the webinar because this is all still really relevant. You don't have to found an organization to operate in an entrepreneurial way. And I actually think for the sector to achieve more in a continually resource-constrained environment, the more employees, the more team members, the more organizations that function with the same mentality that an entrepreneur will bring to their work is going to help us achieve better results for the amount of resources that we're spending. So it's a great mix to have in the room, and really excited. We're excited to go through the content with you guys. So I'll just give a brief introduction to Social Good Startup. An idea to launch is the first workshop series that we designed. It's basically an 8-week workshop, 2.5 hours a week that Sean and I built to share the knowledge that we developed both in the field, learning things the hard way, things that I learned through my master's program at the Robert F. Wagner School of Public Service at NYU, things that I learned going through competitions and leading my organization. A lot of them were things that I wish I had known sooner, that I would have saved a lot of time, I would have saved a lot of money, I would have saved a lot of heartbreak if I had known the smarter questions to ask in a better order. And sitting on that knowledge when it would be enormously valuable for all of you out there and the dozens of people who've taken our workshop and the thousands of others who've never heard of us and we'll hopefully connect with them soon. The idea is really like, let's help close the cycle. Let's help people know best practices so they're more likely to be successful, to find a model of entrepreneurial success to achieve the change they want to in the world, or to find out that their model isn't going to work sooner so that they don't get burnt out and they don't waste whatever resources they're prepared to commit on the wrong model. So the quick overview of what we cover, and we're going to give you a preview of all these 8 weeks just in a few minutes on this webinar, just to give you a quick overview. It goes in the order that you can see on this slide from bottom to top. So we get things started. We really want to get a sense of who the major stakeholders are and what's motivating them. You may be interested in purely solving a problem that you find personally relevant for you. You may have a family member who is affected by a gap in a market. You may have a personal connection with a disease that a family member of you have had. You may also be interested in making a lot of money if you're going to start a social business. And really understanding the full breadth and multiple motivators of what you want to achieve as an entrepreneur, and surfacing those motivations is really important, because understanding what success is going to mean to you at the get-go is going to make it much more likely that you're going to be able to design a venture that will help you achieve what you want. And if you have multiple stakeholders, particularly in a foundation environment, understanding the pure and the multiple motivators of board members, of contributing, those who have contributed their resources to that foundation, is just as important as understanding the motivations of key staff. So we start the workshop by helping participants really understand, well, what do I want and what do I care about? Because as an entrepreneur, you need to stay motivated. Then in the second week, give it a gut check. We encourage people to explore a need. Is this actually a social problem? There's a lot of evidence out there. You don't want to spend time developing an organization that's not necessarily addressing a core need. You have to do your homework to know the market, to begin to test your business model. Are my assumptions accurate? And then tell your story. So how do I get the stakeholders, the volunteers, the donors, the investors interested in my model or my new program design? And then how do I bring it to market? So that's basically the overview. If you're interested in reading in more detail, you can find information about each individual week on our website. So I touched on this a little bit already, but this is a really important first question to ask, is what is success really? A lot of the discussion around doing service work focuses around a really true commitment to unconditional service. And while I think that that's important, I think that that's something that some people seek. I also recognize, and I think it's maybe more human, to recognize that people have a lot of different reasons for doing the kinds of work they do. And so really, as an individual and as a professional within an organization, the more that you know about those motivators for your team members and those you're working with, the less you'll have miscommunications and the more you'll be able to shape a vision together. This is a quote, and it says, "Your assumptions are your windows on the world. Scrub them off once in a while or the light won't come in." And this is really the basis for a lot of the work that entrepreneurs need to press themselves to question. Whether you're assuming you know that there's a need for a particular kind of social service, whether you're assuming that a market wants something in particular, testing those assumptions before making big investments of time and money and energy into building on solutions that are based off of those assumptions is really a key aspect of what it takes to operate in an entrepreneurial way, whether you're doing it for your own organization or for somebody else's. And a key aspect of that as a takeaway is your problem, the problem that you want to solve, is it actually a problem? And not surprisingly, time and time again, in my experience, I've seen many organizations who seem to be working on stuff that may not necessarily be the best use of their resources and their time, because it may not be a central problem. Have you done your homework? If you're going to operate in a particular sector, particularly if you're going into a new space, a new issue area, or a new business model design, do you know what's out there? Can you learn the lessons that other people have learned in the past? Do you know what your competitors or your potential collaborators are doing? Understanding your space so you can make smart decisions and design something that's actually different in the market is also a key component of operating in an entrepreneurial way. This is another quote that I really like. It's, "Research is formalized curiosity. It's poking and prying with a purpose." And I use this quote because of the end of it, because of the purpose connection. And there's a lot of work that's being done out there to collect information, whether it's quantitatively or qualitatively, to do environmental scans, to create reports. But I would say that the difference between that and an entrepreneurial approach is conducting research to test assumptions and to explore risk in the business model that you're designing. If you know what you're trying to experiment with, either with your own tests or with the research that you're doing, it becomes a much more active and useful process when you're conducting research in the market. So there's different kinds of research, and this Venn diagram begins to illustrate the ways that progressive entrepreneurs and adaptive entrepreneurs need to be thinking about their space. And this applies to the philanthropic space as well. A competitive analysis in the context of a foundation might be those other foundations that are also supporting similar kinds of work. It may also be the competitive environment in which your applicants exist as well. Do they understand their competitive environment? And as a funder, will you be better off if you have a full scope understanding of both of those things? And as you move out in the diagram, what you're beginning to explore beyond the specific competitive environment are trends in the marketplace. So not necessarily where things are now, but where things might be in 5 or 10 years from now. And you can look at macro changes that may have an impact on your area of focus. Keeping both of these things in mind, because the world, as we all know, doesn't stay static, are key components to being an adaptive and entrepreneurial operator. Not putting too much emphasis on plans. We touched on this a little bit when we went through Canvas and design, but pretty much every leader in the entrepreneurial space is trying to reinforce this. And yet business plan competitions and many foundations are dragging behind. So the question is, how do we bring this new way of thinking into the process? And can you, as emerging professionals in the field, can you play a role in helping to bring about this change as well? So here are some quotes that I like that are relevant to this theme. We all know Abraham Lincoln. So he said, "Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe, getting ready, knowing your space, figuring out your approach, making sure you have the right tools." As an entrepreneur, that knowledge and understanding of the space and an understanding of processes, that is your axe. And it's way better to sharpen your axe than to start hacking away at things. Dwight D. Eisenhower said, "Plans are worthless, but planning is everything." It's the same idea. You may write a plan, but it's the work that went into helping you be able to write that plan that's actually valuable. And that's because, as Steve Blank says, in the real world, most business plans don't survive the first few months of customer contact. And that's no different in the philanthropic world. When a real concept for a new program hits the ground, the reality oftentimes is different. And so providing flexibility, encouraging flexibility, and expecting things to change is more of an entrepreneurial approach to thinking about social impact interventions that reflects the reality of how things hit the ground in the real world. This is a very successful American, Herb Keller, founder of Southwest Airlines. He says, we have a strategic plan. It's called doing things. And I really, I like this picture because he looks like he means it. And B, it's just a really great way to keep what we've been talking about in mind. Design is coming up with experiments, putting them into the world, and learning from that. It's not sitting in an office thinking about what the real world might look like and how things might unfold, and then 3 months later finding out that your core assumptions were wrong. So doing things, finding ways to do small things that move things forward on a regular basis is also a key component of successful entrepreneurial practices. Something that I've learned both in the workshops that we've run and just in the work that I'm doing is the importance of knowing the difference between a vision and a mission statement. And people use different definitions of these terms in different ways. And the definitions that I've found that work best for me is to make them pretty distinct. So a vision, in my recommendation when you think about vision, is to think about vision as painting a picture of the future that you hope to create. What does the world look like on the day that you could feel like you could shut down or you could stop doing the work that you're doing? What does that imagined aspirational future look like? And if you can articulate that clearly and get your stakeholders to agree on a vision, it paints a beautifully clear picture of where you want to go. And having that clear vision of where you want to go, making sure people are on the same page is key to working together, particularly in the ambiguity and uncertainty of an entrepreneurial environment. A mission statement is much more tactical. A mission statement is, what are you doing right now to contribute to that future? It may be, and it oftentimes is, a small component of what you would hope to do. But again, that clear articulation, this is what we do as an organization, as a business, as a social enterprise, as a foundation, also implies this is what we do not do. And that helps you make decisions about where to focus your energy, your time, and your creativity. Sometimes it's those constraints that allow you to come up with the most innovative models because you need to figure out a way specifically to move towards your vision. And this is, don't worry about the boxes, a logic model. For those of you not familiar with it, what's important to recognize about this and coming up with a successful social good business model is that a logic model is what connects a vision to mission. So on the left side of this is activities, it's outputs, it's inputs that you need to operate as an organization. That's what's connected to your mission. On the right side of a logic model is what's your vision. And this explains, or sometimes if they're in other formats referred to as a theory of change, really what that is explaining how what you do today, on a day-to-day basis has the potential to achieve the long-term change that you want to see in the world. And so that way, as team members, you have shared understanding of what that theory of change linkage is. And as you invite other participants, partners, potentially donors into your communities, they can make a decision whether they agree with your theory of change or not. So understanding it in a practical way, as opposed to just in sort of a creative graphic illustration way, I think is a key component to being a successful social entrepreneur. It's important to stay creative and iterative. We've kind of touched on this already, so I'll jump to a couple more quotes. I love this one because it's definitely relevant. And for those of you who have thought about starting a business, or those of you who have in particular, you know how easy it is to fall in love with your own ideas. And this is just reinforcing, don't let that happen. Because if one isn't doing the job, there's always another one. And the more that you leave space for new ideas to come in, the more that you learn quickly that your idea isn't working, the more that you'll open up the space in your brain and your creative mind to generate those new questions, those new experiments that might help you find that breakthrough solution to the issues that you care about. And this is an illustration that kind of gets to that point. I'm just going to take a quick sip of tea. What is success? How do people get there? And the stories that we hear about people like Bill Gates and other very notable or visible people who represent success, they're often backwards engineering their stories in the way that we remember them to look much like this on the left, like a straight line, that their life took a path because you know where they're going to end up. But the reality, and many of them will tell you this if you ask them, if you read about them, and many of you will experience this or have already, is that life much more often, and particularly an entrepreneurial life, much more often looks like this squiggly line. It doesn't even necessarily end up going up and to the right. Sometimes it goes back down, but then you realize later that that was success too. So, if you think about, do I want to be entrepreneurial? Am I prepared for the unexpected twists and turns, the bumps in the road? That's an important question, particularly as a member of an organization. If you're trying to get the organization on board with being entrepreneurial, they need to be prepared to be comfortable with those twists and turns, because if everybody wants a straight line, they're going to be disappointed. This quote from Andy Warhol also touches on the idea of creativity in business model design. He said, being good in business is the most fascinating kind of art. And what I love about this is just that idea in and of itself, that designing a business model is a creative challenge, and one that can be that engaging. And even for an artist of the caliber of Andy Warhol and of the creativity, for him thinking about business and expressing his relationship with business as the most fascinating kind of art, I think could be an inspiration for those of us who may be thinking about business as just spreadsheets and things that may be less appealing for some of us. In our workshop, one of the other elements that we incorporate and that we think is really important to democratize in our space is generally referred to as the lean startup movement. So this is the cover of a book that was written by an entrepreneur named Eric Reis. And this basically gets at the sense that startups are different from businesses or organizations in general. Why are they different? These excerpts from the book, I think, really get to the core of it. So Eric writes that a startup is a human institution designed to deliver a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. This book is written mostly for traditional entrepreneurs, so if you overlay the language for social entrepreneurship onto this, you begin to ask the question, well, if we're delivering services or addressing social problems under conditions of extreme uncertainty, that's what makes the difference between a startup and a proven organization. Another lesson that's key at the bottom of the screen is that the best practices that are learned in other contexts, as in non-startup environments, don't transplant well into the startup soil. They may not be relevant at all. And yet, we find a lot of reports. There's a lot of really important work that's being done on best organizational practices, but those may not necessarily be the same approaches that are going to best serve startups operating under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And to bring it home, this is Eric. What he says is the most spectacular startup failures result when people were in a startup situation but failed to recognize it or failed to recognize what it meant for their behavior. And what he's really getting at here is, in addition to extreme uncertainty, it's really important to be ruthlessly efficient in measuring what you're doing, and making sure your activities are tied to experiments that test your assumptions and allow you to build a business model moving forward. And he expresses that in this quote from the book as well. A lean startup is a methodology for coping with uncertainty and unknowns with agility, poise, and ruthless efficiency. So agility is the ability to make those twists and turns you saw earlier in the squiggly line. The poise is the ability not to get ruffled when an unexpected turn or a dramatic one takes place, and to make sure your team handles that in stride. And ruthless efficiency is making sure that you are careful about where you invest time and resources until you've tested those underlying assumptions and verified them. Because otherwise, everything you build on top of that is just going to be built on a rickety foundation. And oftentimes will be a waste of your time and energy. And that's where we at Social Good Startup, what we really try to create is lean social entrepreneurs. And those are people like yourselves who learn and who practice the identifying and testing their riskiest assumptions first. And we've designed a model to help figure out what exactly that looks like. In part helped by another book in this family, for those of you who are interested in reading further. This is called Running Lean. And this is sort of the bridge between the business model generation canvas and the lean theory. And at Social Good Startup, we've updated it with something we call the Social Good Canvas. And what you're looking at now is an example of what that canvas looks like. And you'll notice there's 4 different colors. Each of these colors represent risk areas. So existing alternatives, revenue streams, and cost structures. Those are all elements of what we would call market risk. If you're selling services or products to a market that's paying, or if you're looking for donors, you might consider them a market. What are the existing alternatives? Are you offering them something different? Do people want to pay for it? Can you execute on this in a way that's financially sustainable? Those are the questions in the order you see on the screen that are important to test when exploring market risk. On the upper right-hand corner is customer risk in light blue. And what that's about is, are there people out there who want to engage with you? This could be beneficiaries as an alternative to customers, but are people looking for what you're offering? Who are the early adopters and how are you going to reach them? Again, in order of the assumptions that you'll want to test. Product risk is something similar, and this goes back to needs assessment in orange. Is there a problem? Does your solution actually address that problem? Is it different, and how are you going to measure that moving forward, or the key components of that? And then on the impact side, is there a social problem? This is different from the product problem in the sense that sometimes those aren't solved by the same service. So you might have someone who's buying access to one item that's actually getting something else. This is solving a social problem. An example might be treadle pumps in Bangladesh. They're basically cheap pumps that people walk on to raise groundwater up to do farming. So the problem is that it takes too much energy to get the water and bring it to my field, but the social problem is that you're helping rural farmers make more money so they can hopefully lift themselves out of poverty. So looking at the market opportunity and your social problem separately. And you can kind of get the sense, but this is basically the elements of how to break down a business model into its components of risk. We're going to do a quick element on storytelling, and this is mainly around the idea of sales. So as you know, as foundation professionals, oftentimes those who are looking for your support are trying to sell you something. This could be with the best of intentions, but I mean, at the end of the day, that's really what it's about. It's trying to find and encourage other people to get on board with what you're working on. And as an entrepreneur, as someone leading a social business or someone trying to bring more entrepreneurship into your organization, that in and of itself may be an initiative that you need to learn how to sell. And this is a guy, he's famous in the pickup community, but he just says something that I think is really relevant here for those of you that's like professional people who train people how to pick people up. He says attraction is not a choice, and he's right. It's not a choice, and particularly for many of us who are committed to social change, we've been so steeped in logical thinking and constructing models and explaining how we think in a reasoned way that we forget about the emotion. And the key originator, or maybe one of the more famous originators of the Building Friends movement, Dale Carnegie, says, when dealing with people, remember, you're not dealing with creatures of logic, but creatures of emotion. And I'm probably making this mistake in the way I've constructed some of this webinar. But at the end of the day, it's the people that move you, the stories that make you feel something, that engage you, that really make a difference in terms of whether you remember or whether you're moved by something. And in trying to bring a new entrepreneurial venture to market and trying to get your organization to make a change in culture, engaging your audiences in those ways is really important. This just to hammer it home a little bit, Samuel Butler said, logic is like a sword. Those who appeal to it shall perish by it. So as much as logic is important, you went through theory of change, you saw that fancy model, you need to understand what you're doing, but that's not necessarily sharing the details of that, or oftentimes the worst possible way to get people on board with the entrepreneurial vision that you're trying to paint.
So Todd, I know that you prepared some slides for us for our folks who work at foundations, and I'm wondering, because we want to leave some time also for some questions at the end, I'm wondering if maybe we can dive into some of those takeaways that we can give our members on how to use some of these practices in their day-to-day work.
Sure. I think we're relatively close, so we'll just jump in.
We have one last poll.
One last poll. All right. Take it away.
All right. So we have one final question here. On a scale of 1 to 5, how open is your organization to social entrepreneurship? All right, so we're going to close the poll. It looks like it's fairly mixed. I think you can all see the results.
Oh, okay.
But if you want to address that, Todd, briefly.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like a normal curve. Mm-hmm. Actually, 20% are extremely open. 25% are. Oh yeah, no, there should be. Yeah, so now I think we've activated, so you should be able to see the results. But discouragingly, perhaps, and not surprisingly, it looks like 25% of you are working at organizations that are actively disinterested in entrepreneurship. So, I would just say to those of you out there who are facing that bleak environment, that sometimes the best way is using examples and starting one piece at a time, rather than trying to transform everything at once. So, hopefully, we can explore some of that in the Q&A if you have questions about that as we go forward. But as Emily said,
yeah, we have some questions coming in. We can take a moment now to address some of them, I think. What are examples of problems that aren't exactly problems? That came in, I guess, earlier.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think oftentimes where the best examples of this happen where really well-intentioned people, particularly people of wealth, are excited or interested in a new area of social impact. And because they're new to the space or they don't really understand the full environment in which that social problem exists and what the contributing factors are, they sometimes focus their energy or their passion on maybe a highly visible or easily recognizable symptom or other related element of what that problem might be. And then in the spirit of their positive intentions, mobilize teams and start spending money and investing in that issue area before they really know and the test, is this actually a social problem that has been mapped out? If that's the mission area that I'm focusing on, are there other ways to achieve the vision that I care about that are maybe more critical as a problem? That might be a more effective way for me to spend the money and the energy that I'm trying to marshal towards that effort. And some of these things come with time, learning. And no matter how much homework you do, you're not necessarily going to know everything. But the more that you take the time to ask some of the basic questions at the beginning, the less likely you'll be working on a problem that isn't backed up by sociological research, or that may not necessarily be the most effective way to make the change that you care about.
Hey, thanks, Todd. So maybe we can go through some of these takeaways now and then get to some questions at the end.
Sure.
How does that sound?
Emily and Rahsaan asked me to think about how to apply some of these concepts to your current working situations. And based on the polls, it seems like these are all still relevant. So the next couple slides basically map out what you could do within the foundation you're working at now, with your applicants, with your grantees, and then eventually on your own, potentially, if you're eventually end up starting your own organizations. If you're looking for that first step, you can try bringing the design process into your team, particularly for those of you whose organizations are not really open to entrepreneurial practices. You could start by just mapping out what exactly your foundation is doing. Use Canvas. Try to get those members of your team on the same page about what your organization is doing, and introduce them to some of the innovative practices that are out there. Other thing is mapping out potential alternatives. So once you've mapped out what your business model for your foundation is now, what are some other ways that you might be able to achieve progress towards your vision? And introducing those alternatives, even just as a point of conversation within your organization, is something else that you can do. Consistently identifying and experimenting with your assumptions, that's going to be a key component to beginning to operate as a professional, just in a more entrepreneurial way. Identify measures, incorporate measurement into the work that you're doing so that you can learn, continually learn and evolve. And democratizing the idea that risk and failure are necessary precursors to great innovations. A lot of practices that I've seen in the philanthropic communities and nonprofit communities are attempt to reduce risk at the start of things for a whole host of different reasons. And yet that stifles innovation. And I'm not the only person to be talking about this. The Case Foundation, for those of you familiar, are really launching a national campaign to encourage philanthropy to be more fearless. And I think it's in the guise of this fundamental reality. And then, getting organizations to think about increasing their transparency, to share learnings, including those failures, and taking a part of the resources that are being invested. And even if it's just 1 or 2 or 3% of the resources of the foundation, pre-allocating them to initiatives that are identified as high uncertainty. So with your applicants, you could adjust guidelines. Rather than putting weight on plans, you can focus more on processes. You could ask them to articulate whether they've done their thinking around, are they unique in the marketplace? How do they compare with that competitive environment? And you can encourage them to get razor sharp clarity on their mission and vision. Because as we've talked about today, those are two very different things. As you develop your entrepreneurial skills, then if you have the bandwidth to do it, you can give more in-depth feedback. So maybe more productive, helpful feedback to help some of the applicants who may be traditional nonprofits who aren't necessarily practicing these entrepreneurial practices either, to begin to think in entrepreneurial ways, or helping them find resources to better prepare, or rejected applicants, helping them also find resources. And there are a lot of resources out there. The workshop that we teach is one such option. So how do you help those out there who are self-motivated to make a difference find a model that's likely to work? And if you can connect them with those resources, it increases the likelihood they'll be able to succeed. And this is the same thing with your grantees. So once you have that relationship established, be flexible and understanding. If things change and they change for good reason, that just may be a learning that was necessary. There's no reason to have your grantees feel like they need to execute on the plan that was submitted if they already know that it's not going to work in the way that they thought it would. So building a culture around flexibility, if you don't already have it within your organization, is really important. Again, focusing on process improvements and learnings as opposed to just outcomes, because sometimes an initiative might fail, but if an organization is entrepreneurial, that'll just make them that much more likely to succeed the next time. It doesn't mean that they're not worth investing in again. And encourage your grantees to practice this ruthless, sort of lean, evidence-based approach to testing out new ideas and to evaluating the effectiveness of their existing programs, because it's that process that builds a culture of efficiency that's going to help the resources you're able to commit to go longer and be more likely to hit a model of sustainability. And then last, I would view your current job as an opportunity, both to develop these practices, but also to get to know the field that you're working in really well in the competitive landscape. Because if you do have an idea for an organization or a social enterprise that you want to launch one day, you'll have a great head start if you already have an expertise in that niche space that you're dealing in, and it will benefit the current organization you're working for, as well as your future goals, to continue to develop that expertise with intention. So,
to Todd's point, I think that's extremely important for EPIP members to remember that they should think beyond what their job description is, but think about how they can continue to learn and apply what they're learning in their communities and in ways that may or may not be helpful to their current job. Sometimes the skills that you develop are not necessarily appreciated in your current context, but can be something that unleash your potential for your next job or for your next independent venture. And that's one of the things that Measuring a Leader is about, is really trying to help us develop our skills so that we can have the impact on society that we want to have that may or may not be reflected in our current job.
Yeah, thanks, Rahsaan. It looks like we have a couple questions, so we can address them. You want to read it?
Okay, so thank you all for your fantastic comments, by the way. We love getting your feedback, and we have time. We have time for one or two more questions. Generally, we do try to make the slides available at the end of this webinar, and we're happy to do so in this case. Todd teaches this workshop here in New York. So if anybody's here in New York and is interested in hearing more about the workshop, please visit their website, socialgoodstartup.com, or send us an email here at EPIP. You can reach me, Emily, at epip.org, or Michael at epip.org, and we're happy to put you in touch with Todd if you have any questions. And it looks like we don't have any new questions coming in, but there's a comment here from Christine who says, it seems that the entrepreneurial mindset and method is what we traditionally know as evidence-based social interventions, but sexy, faster, simpler, more accessible, and easier to share. Plenty of colleagues may be turned away by the word entrepreneurship, but we'll see the overlap once they dig into a presentation like this one. How do I start spreading the word to create a movement? We may not have enough time to fully address that.
No, I mean, that's a perfect, yeah, it's funny that you asked that, because in my job as co-director and director of strategy at Ignite Good, we teach people storytelling for movement building. And so that's maybe another webinar. Rahsaan has something to say.
And I also think that a lot of ideas within philanthropy spread by building a community. So by finding like-minded people that work at other foundations that are experimenting with these types of practices and bringing those stories of other colleagues that are doing that type of work is a way to kind of build kind of the backing that you need to try to advance it within your own institution. So hopefully EPIP is one of those places that you can point to as a network of people who believe in this type of thinking, and you can identify other colleagues that work at other foundations that are trying to experiment with this and this is something that can gain traction. And there are a lot of examples of issue areas that gain traction because individual program officers and people that work within foundations kind of banded together even before their boards and senior leadership did to kind of give it the space to have a larger audience within the field.
So we want to be mindful of the time. It's just about 4 o'clock now, Eastern time. And if there were any concepts here that you feel EPIP should unpack further, please drop us a line and we're happy to build another webinar around it. So before we close out, I just want to say at the end of this webinar, there will be a very brief survey we'd love for you to fill out because we really rely on your feedback. We are extremely grateful to Todd for his time today and expertise. This was really fantastic. And are there any last comments anyone wants to say before we close down?
Yeah, no, thanks. I think thanks, Emily, and thanks, Rahsaan. I think members of the EPIP community are really fortunate to have the kind of thinking to kind of push the boundaries a little bit and bring some of these new approaches into the conversation. And I think, to the question about movements, and all joking aside, it starts one conversion at a time in a way. You just start with one person and get them on board, and start with one organization and find the other people, the other organizations out there doing it, and work together to convince more people. I mean, that's really what movements are all about. And to Emily and Rahsaan's point, yes, we offer this workshop to the public. But we also work with organizations who are interested in bringing these same skills to their communities. So, if you think this is valuable, this kind of learning might be valuable for your grantees or maybe for your applicants who haven't yet achieved the clarity around what they're trying to do, and you want to find a way without cost to be able to provide them with a resource. That's what we designed it for. I do this because I want to help share, democratize the learnings that I brought into the field, and to help all of you out there who want to make a difference in the world be able to be more likely to achieve that. So that's my passion, my mission, and I'm happy to talk to any of you about ways that we might be able to work together and achieve that goal.
Okay, great. Thanks, Todd. Thank you all for your feedback today, and have a wonderful day, and look out for the next EPIP webinar.